Politicians under threat. Who is behind this? Will Trump be able to survive to inauguration? Trump may face JFK's fate. Trump can die. These are the kinds of headlines currently circulating in international mass media. Similar rhetoric about various politicians regularly appears even after they have officially assumed office. A natural question arises. Who is driving the spread of such narratives, and what are the true objectives of such campaigns? In general, why has aggression against politicians escalated in recent years, evolving from informational terror attacks even to physical violence? Over the past decade, violence against politicians has increased significantly at all levels. Most of us are aware of high-profile assassination attempts targeting top officials. Donald Trump faced 2 assassination attempts during his 2024 campaign. Earlier, in May 2024, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico survived an attack. This wave of political violence has swept across the globe. In the UK, 2 parliament members were killed. Labour MP Joe Cox in 2016, ahead of the Brexit vote, and Conservative MP David Amess in 2021. Former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro survived a knife attack during his 2018 campaign. And in 2021, Haitian Prime Minister Jovenel Moïse was murdered by hired assassins. Former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was assassinated in July 2022. In September 2022, there was an assassination attempt on Argentinian Vice President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. In November 2022, former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan narrowly escaped an attempt on his life. Ecuadorian presidential candidate Fernando Villavicencio was murdered in 2023. And in early 2024, South Korean opposition leader Lee Jae-myung miraculously survived a knife attack to the neck. While high-profile assassination attempts on top politicians make headlines, few people are aware of the grim reality faced daily by thousands of individuals who chose politics as their occupation. Death threats, assaults, and smear campaigns have become part of the political landscape worldwide. Many parliament members in democratic countries, from the US to Germany, admit that constant pressure and threats force them to leave office or even contemplate suicide. There are serious grounds to believe that this disturbing trend suggests something deeper than isolated acts of rage. It is rather a systematically organized violence campaign aimed at undermining democratic foundations. For many politicians, threats to their lives are no longer an abstract concept, but an everyday reality. In the UK, following the murder of MP David Amess, Conservative MP Mike Freer for Finchley and Golders Green announced that he and his staff would wear bulletproof vests and activate alarms during constituency events. Rosie Duffield, a Labour Party candidate, spent £2,000 of her own money on security after receiving death threats and later withdrew from local election debates. Conservative MP Elliot Colburn revealed that relentless harassment and psychological pressure urged him to attempt suicide. Colburn also stated that there is not a single party left where at least one MP has not attempted suicide. Studies indicate a similar trend in Germany. Since 2019, attacks on German politicians have doubled, with 2,790 incidents recorded in 2023, compared to 1,420 in 2019. After the assassination of regional governor Walter Lübke in June 2019, attacks on politicians increased. Within just 1 week in May 2024, multiple attacks were reported. Member of the European Parliament Matthias Ecke, Berlin's Minister for Economic Affairs Franziska Giffey, Essen Deputy Mayor Rolf Fliss, and 2 Stuttgart MPs were targeted. Preliminary data from last year indicate 234 physical assaults on politicians and political activists. This surge of violence undermines Germany's democratic institutions. "We are witnessing an escalation of violence against democracy," said Interior Minister Nancy Faeser. Denmark, like many other countries, is also experiencing a disturbing rise in aggressive political rhetoric and threats against public figures. Years of mounting tension culminated in a physical assault on Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen on the street of Copenhagen. Frederiksen described the incident as a predictable outcome of the long-growing trend of political violence, multiplying threats on social media, and increasingly hostile political discourse. In Canada, Minister of Public Safety Marco Mendicino reported receiving death threats via social media in June 2022. The volume of threats against MPs and other politicians has surged, including verbal assaults and physical aggression. In response to growing concerns regarding their safety, all Canadian MPs were provided with panic buttons to quickly summon police or the Parliament security. Here are the words of politicians who endure physical and verbal attacks. It makes you feel you are not wanted here and should disappear, said a candidate for the center-left Social Democrats (SPD) in district elections in the eastern state of Thuringia. Arsonist set his home on fire after he had organized a protest against extremism in February. Giving up is now an option, although I would have never have thought it before. Nowadays, 3 men shouting at me that I'm a pedophile or a criminal, or we will see where the future leads us, or we all belong in front of a wall, is almost, I would say, business as usual, said Nicholas Ninas, a member of the European Parliament from the Green Party. In the US, threats against members of Congress have surged more than tenfold over the past 5 years. In 2016, there were 902 recorded threats, while in 2021, their number reached 9,600. Recent incidents include a 2017 shooting by a left-wing extremist during a Republican congressional baseball practice, which severely injured Congressman Steve Scalise, a mailing of pipe bombs to more than a dozen prominent Democrats in 2018, a 2020 plot to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, a 2022 attempt by a pro-choice advocate to assassinate Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh at his home, and the attack on Paul Pelosi, husband of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, in the same year in an attempt to reach her. These facts only represent incidents involving top-level politicians. The reality at the state level is even more alarming. Recent studies reveal that over 40% of public officials and politicians in various states have faced direct threats or attacks in the past 3 years. Additionally, 90% of politicians reported experiencing various forms of violence, including stalking, intimidation, and harassment. The analysis of current events indicates that the situation has already gone far beyond political rivalry. The increasing violence against politicians cannot be explained solely by the struggle between opposition and pro-government forces or intra-party conflicts. In democratic countries, threats and violence have become an everyday reality for politicians at all levels, regardless of their ideological views or party affiliation. Therefore, today every politician is under threat. This is further exacerbated due to another significant issue noted by researchers across various countries: the rapidly growing level of support for violence against politicians among ordinary citizens. For instance, the approval of violence against politicians in the United States has reached unprecedented levels. According to a recent national survey, 1 in 5 Americans believe that violence may solve U.S. political divisions. For comparison, in Northern Ireland in 1973, at the height of the Troubles, 1 in 4 Catholics and 1 in 6 Protestants supported the idea of violence as a legitimate means to achieve goals. Today, the figures in the United States are approaching these levels. A dangerous transformation is taking place in democratic countries. Violence is no longer considered taboo and is becoming an acceptable way of resolving political divisions. The most alarming trend is that citizens increasingly support aggression against politicians, being unaware of the destructive consequences of such behavior. The shocking statistics presented above are just the tip of the iceberg. Even more concerning is how society and the media trivialize this issue. Violence against politicians is often framed as occupational hazard or presented in a comedic light when politicians are splashed with paint, egged, or pelted with dirt. Behind the comical coverage lies a harsh reality. People who are meant to defend citizens' rights and adopt laws become hostages to fear and harassment. A tragic paradox arises. Those who applaud violence against political figures are dismantling, with their own hands, the very foundation of democracy that they claim to be trying to improve. Under constant psychological pressure, fear, and threats, politicians are simply unable to work productively and fulfill their duties. If this trend continues, the civilized world will face a collapse of the democratic system that has been built over the past centuries. What is the cause? Such a sharp spike in violence has led to a number of scientific studies. Authors of those studies asked the question, why is this happening in a democratic society? How did it come to be that today 1 in 5 Americans believes that violence against politicians is acceptable? When was the frightening line crossed, beyond which violence shifted from being a taboo to an acceptable option? Some researchers say that modern violence against politicians significantly differs from what it was in the past. They point out that radicalization of criminals often occurs on the internet. It is through online communication that individuals are turned into extremists. In other words, a person can sit alone at home, but through a computer screen, they can be manipulated to the point where they are ready to go out and commit acts of violence. Other researchers argue that the rise in violence is due to the emergence of extremist groups that intentionally try to create chaos in society. Why do they target politicians in particular? According to the researchers, extremists do so because politicians symbolize order and stability, values that extremists want to destroy. Their goal, therefore, is not simply to attack a specific individual, but to provoke social unrest and dismantle the system. It is noteworthy that while the said studies accurately describe the situation, they do not answer the key question: who is truly behind these processes and why is it all happening? Researchers failed to identify the root cause because their studies are confined to the context of their own countries, so they are hindered from grasping the full picture. To understand the real causes, one must look beyond the national context and examine the situation on a global scale. The key question to ask is qui prodest? Who benefits? After all, escalation of hatred towards politicians in any given country primarily harms citizens of that country, including representatives of all political parties. That's certainly not in their interest. Can neighboring democratic countries benefit from weakening their democratic neighbor state? Not either, as this entails serious problems. So who strives to destroy democracy worldwide? It can only be a force aiming for unlimited power and the establishment of global totalitarianism. This force must also possess a methodology of hidden manipulation and resources to carry out such operations against democratic states. Today, there is such a force in the world that uses distinctive methods to achieve its goals. To understand the nature of that force, you only need to analyze the techniques it employs to manipulate public opinion. Qui prodest? Hidden manipulators. The methodology of inciting hatred in absolutely different countries often displays strikingly similar patterns marked with the same methods of dehumanizing and demonizing political figures. Who actively used those methods and where did they originate from? Chapters 3 and 4 of the Impact documentary answer these questions. Those tactics were refined and employed by apologists under the Third Reich. The tactics enabled Adolf Hitler to transform one of Europe's most advanced societies into a totalitarian regime, with complete suppression of dissent and absolute power of the Führer. The shadow force, referred to in the Impact documentary as global anti-cultism, did not vanish after the democratic world's victory over Nazism. Instead, it continued to evolve, refining and transmitting its methods over the years. Today, the Russian Association of Centers for the Study of Religions and Sects, RATSERS, is the immediate successor to this methodology. Its president, Alexander Dvorkin, is a disciple of the founders of the Third Reich's Apologetic Center. Possessing the methods, however, is only part of the equation. Having resources to apply them is another. Under the aegis of the Russian Orthodox Church, ROC, RATSERS has reportedly achieved significant success in consolidating power in the country it controls, Russia. Over the past 3 decades, RATSERS's activities have contributed to the dismantling of democratic institutions and the erosion of rights and freedoms. As a result, a totalitarian regime of suppression of free thinking has been formed, where ROC, led by the former KGB agent and now billionaire patriarch Kirill, plays a central role. In this situation, it's important to understand that RATSERS actually uses ROC as a tool of influence. Since its incorporation into the ROC structure, RATSERS has long leveraged the church's authority and resources to enhance its control within the country. While such dominance by one religious organization isn't beneficial to the state, as it risks creating an alternative center of power, this aligns perfectly with RATSERS's goals within the ROC, where it has seized total control. This has resulted in the suppression, prohibition, and persecution of all ROC's competitors in Russia. Beyond domestic power consolidation, RATSERS also wields resources to conduct similar activities on a global scale. Applying methods of the Third Reich's Apologetic Center has proven effective in bolstering RATSERS's influence in totalitarian countries. As the leading ideological center of global anti-cultism, RATSERS closely collaborates not only with all branches of Russian authorities, but also with another totalitarian state, China. RATSERS's collaboration with Chinese authorities has enabled a massive campaign against the country's own citizens, causing millions of people to be sent to concentration camps where live organ harvesting occurs. What prevents RATSERS from achieving its goal of ultimate global power and influence? Democratic nations, or more specifically, the presence and work of democratic institutions. Those very institutions which RATSERS dismantled in Russia by lobbying for the country's withdrawal from international treaties on human rights, as well as for its exit from organizations defending democratic rights and for passing laws like the Yarovaya law, actively promoted by Dvorkin. RATSERS's well-targeted effort to isolate Russia from democratic institutions is illustrated by a 2013 statement from its legal committee chair, lawyer Alexander Korolov. Currently, legal scholars and public figures are actively discussing the unreasonableness of Russia's participation in the activities of the Council of Europe, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and the European Court of Human Rights. Tendencies of European entities to support the activities of sects and cults, political extremist organizations, non-profit organizations acting as foreign agents, as well as homosexuality and other sexual perversions arouse the most significant complaints among the legal community. Contradictions between modern European trends and Russia's socio-political realities are characterized by a deep crisis. From my point of view, the best way out of this situation is for the Russian Federation to withdraw from European institutions and to create independent interstate bodies on the basis of the established Customs Union and the Eurasian Economic Union. In democratic countries, Ratsers is forced to act more carefully by using affiliated organizations like FECRIS and a network of anti-cult centers and religious organizations, not just ROC. We wrote about the formation of this network in detail in the article dedicated to Ratsers agents in Ukraine. Through those entities, Ratsers tries to advocate the introduction of anti-democratic changes in the legislation of democratic countries. Sometimes these attempts are successful, as the 2024 example of France shows. There's a notable connection between the activities of Ratsers agents in France and the country's political unrest manifested in persistent protests and riots. While the French government officially acknowledges Russian influence in movements like the Yellow Vests and pledges to counter them, it paradoxically continues to support and fund FECRIS, the pivotal link in Ratsers' agent network. Anti-cult activities provide an effective cover for creating agent networks within mass media of democratic countries. Read more on this topic in our article, Europe, Open Your Eyes If You Don't Want War. Under the guise of protecting society from dangerous sects and cults, Ratsers agents connect with journalists and identify those who are willing to smear lawful organizations and individuals for career or financial gain. This network is then exploited to destabilize countries. Coordination and funding of this network by Kremlin officials, including Ratsers leaders, have been confirmed through leaked emails of Putin's assistant, Vladislav Surkov. Surkov leaks. Why does the shadow force attack politicians? The organization working to dismantle democracy can be conventionally divided into two leagues. While the lower league focuses on the direct fight against alleged cults and sects, the upper league acts at a higher level. It's an organized force which experts consider to be responsible for systematic violence against politicians. The ultimate goal of the upper league is utmost expansion of its power through a staged process. First, the destruction of democracy, then the creation of controlled chaos, and finally the establishment of a new totalitarian order. Therefore, attacks on politicians aren't accidental. They are a key element of this strategy. Politicians, as elected representatives of the people, provide a vital connection between citizens and the public administration system. Without this connection, democracy cannot function effectively. The shadow force deliberately incites assassinations and attacks, creating an atmosphere of terror and constant fear among political figures. At the same time, a massive campaign of slander and disinformation against politicians is carried out through the media. This propaganda influences the population, radicalizing public attitudes toward politicians and fostering growing hatred against them. All of that further hinders politicians' normal work, keeping them under incessant pressure and harassment. Consequently, politicians are unable to effectively fulfill their duties, and democratic institutions become paralyzed. Yet, if, for any reason, politicians are unable to fulfill their functions, someone else will step in to take their place. That's precisely how Ratsers agents, through their systematic attacks on political figures, disrupt normal functioning of democratic governance, ultimately undermining and dismantling democracy as such. Now, let's return to the dehumanizing headlines we cited at the beginning of this article. Let us carefully examine who is truly behind this campaign of hate incitement. A thorough analysis of international publications discussing Donald Trump's potential death reveals a clear network of connections that consistently lead to Alexander Dvorkin and his organization, Ratsers. This network can be traced through the key Western media outlets that disguise their true intentions as objective journalism. Take, for instance, the British Daily Mail. By publishing a provocative article saying that Trump could be assassinated like JFK, this media outlet uses the same rhetoric as in its other well-known anti-cult materials, for example against Tulsi Gabbard, whom they call a cult devotee. It is noteworthy that the same media outlet actively promotes ideas of the authoritative anti-cultist Alexandra Stein, whose connections with Dvorkin and his methodology have long been no secret. The Daily Beast in the US, which posted a prediction about Trump's possible death, is also part of this network. This media is known for its anti-cult rhetoric, including against Trump's team. It also repeats the narrative by calling Tulsi Gabbard a cult member. Notably, one of the authors in this media outlet is Matt Bernardini, who represents a link in the American anti-cult chain, which includes Dave Troy. The latter is, in turn, directly connected to Dvorkin's close circle through participation in joint organizations, events, and public appearances. The situation in Ukrainian mass media is especially indicative. The Union Agency, which replicates hints that Trump may not live to see his inauguration, has direct links with Dvorkin's entities. This news agency actively supported the All-Ukrainian Apologetics Center in the name of John Chrysostom, a direct representative office of Ratzers in Ukraine, coordinated by Pavel Broid. Moreover, Union openly covered activities of another organization in Dvorkin's empire, the Dialogue Center. Behind the seemingly unrelated publications in the international media, there is a single network of influence where all the threads invariably converge to one puppeteer, Dvorkin and Ratzers. This clearly evidences the existence of a global system that uses the same methods of dehumanization against religious organizations and political figures. Whatever thread we pull in this tangle of dehumanizing rhetoric, be it international publications, anti-cult campaigns, or harassment and physical elimination of politicians, all of them inevitably lead to the same source. Behind thousands of attacks on politicians, manipulative articles in mass media, and systematic programming of public consciousness, there is one well-built structure. The methods honed on religious organizations are now being applied as deadly weapons to undermine democratic institutions through dehumanization of political figures. Politicians are harassed via the same methods as those used by Ratzers to promote dehumanizing rhetoric against people whom they label as cult members. In both cases, the goal is identical: to ruin democracy, human rights and freedoms, and to create controlled chaos. However, bullying organizations with the cult stigma, provoking persecution of innocent people, and organizing events such as the Waco tragedy in Texas, USA, is a long way to destroy democracy, whereas using methods of dehumanization and inciting hatred against politicians is a much shorter and more effective way to destabilize society. The parallel between dehumanization of politicians and the mechanisms that Ratzers uses against so-called cult members deserves special attention. In modern discourse, the word politician has gained the same negative connotation as the word cult member. Both terms automatically cause rejection and are perceived by human consciousness as a marker of what society should cleanse itself of. That's not a mere coincidence. The same methods and perpetrators pursuing a common goal are behind both dehumanization campaigns. Most observers do not notice this connection, just as they once didn't notice the true nature of anti-cult campaigns. Instead of seeing the systemic and global nature of the problem, they try to deal with individual manifestations, disinformation, deception, and imaginary competitors, not understanding the scale of the threat to global democratic institutions. Almost every politician faces this kind of harassment, and in their case, the upper league of the same structure is involved, invariably leading to Dvorkin and his Ratzers. Dvorkin adopted the methods of psychological manipulation developed by the Apologetics Center in Nazi Germany. So today, under his leadership, present-day journalists use the same inherited manipulative techniques against political figures, achieving similar destructive results. It is worth noting that politicians are accused of cultism too, but this tactic belongs to the lower league of the aforementioned organization. This kind of approach also yields results. Many politicians who were targeted by assassins were dehumanized in this manner. The upper league of the said structure doesn't have to necessarily use these wordings. The campaign they initiate against a chosen politician is primarily supposed to cause people who are influenced by this kind of rhetoric to stop seeing that politician as a human being. Such a strategy ensures a double effect. Firstly, it paralyzes political activity by plunging politicians into a constant state of fear for their safety and preventing them from performing their duties properly. Secondly, it creates conditions for physical elimination of politicians who pose a particular threat to Ratzer's goals, typically those who are staunch defenders of democratic values. It has been observed that assassination attempts often occurred on the eve of important legislative decisions or agreements aimed at protecting human rights and freedoms. Those attacks were preceded by large-scale media and social media campaigns orchestrated by Ratzer's network of agents and designed to dehumanize and demonize the targeted politician. Behind all of this stands one man with his global ambitions of establishing a new totalitarian order in our world. Programming the lone wolves. Massive information attacks in the media, which are essentially information terrorism, have a powerful impact on the consciousness of a large number of people. Among this mass, there is always a person with emotional lability, especially susceptible to such influence. This individual becomes the ultimate perpetrator of a crime against a politician, acting like a programmed weapon in the hands of those orchestrating the informational campaign. A striking example of this mechanism was the recent assassination attempt on Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico. The attacker, Juraj Cintula, committed this crime under the powerful influence of propaganda from the RTVS television company, the very organization whose proposed reforms he called the reason for his actions. However, the real cause lies deeper. RTVS used special methods of psychological manipulation developed and implemented in the media by Alexander Dvorkin, a disciple of Walter Kunneth. In fact, Cintula is just as much a victim as Prime Minister Fico. He is not a criminal, but a person whose consciousness was deliberately distorted. When subjected to targeted informational assaults, individuals with unstable mental health become victims just as much as those they are manipulated to target. To uncover the true culprits, it is necessary to meticulously analyze all the information the individual consumed, not only immediately before the crime, but also over an extended period. This approach can expose the real information terrorists, those who, under the guise of journalists, activists, and bloggers, spread destructive narratives. Tracing the chain of similar crimes worldwide consistently points to one individual, Alexander Dvorkin. Considering the existence of real methods of covert influence on the subconscious, it is critically important to examine such publications for manipulative techniques specifically designed to bypass human critical thinking. Investigations into crimes against political figures frequently encounter a significant challenge. The attacker's online accounts vanish shortly after the assassination attempt, erasing crucial evidence of psychological conditioning that the person was subjected to. Moreover, investigations often focus solely on the immediate motives of the perpetrator, without examining the deeper question: who shaped these motives and how they incited violent actions? Such superficial approach frequently results in perpetrators being portrayed as lone wolves or radical followers of the ideological opponents of their victims. Interested parties in the media often push the narrative of swift case closures, asserting that there's no need to search for evidence of organized criminal activity where none exists, or urging society to move past this event quickly to avoid deepening political divides. Why has no one yet connected these cases into a coherent whole? After all, the thoughts of committing violence against specific politicians do not arise in these people by chance. They become victims of targeted psychological conditioning orchestrated by agents of Dworkin's network who program people through the media. If even a few such crimes had been thoroughly investigated, with the involvement of qualified psychologists and specialized examinations, Dworkin's network would have already ceased to exist, and politicians and ordinary citizens would be safe. However, time and again, investigators turn a blind eye to the true causes, attributing these incidents to inter-party conflicts or radical views, even though what's really happening is the remote psychological manipulation of individuals, which turns them into zombies. And this can be proved, provided there is a genuine willingness to dig deeper. The system of informational control over politicians functions as a flawless mechanism of manipulation. Every political figure is aware of his vulnerability. Any decision that contradicts the interests of the orchestrators of these harassment campaigns can trigger a large-scale disinformation campaign in the media. Such a campaign is not only capable of destroying a politician's reputation and career, but also poses a real threat to their life and the safety of their loved ones. Politicians find themselves trapped in a no-win situation. The frequency of such cases has already reached a point where it creates an atmosphere of constant fear and dependency. At the same time, they recognize that there is no one to protect them. The Russian Orthodox Church, acting through organizations like Ratsurs and Fekris, controls an extensive network of media outlets and journalists, enabling them to launch information attacks against any undesirable person. This is precisely how democracy is being destroyed, through the creation of a system of total control over politicians, where fear becomes the primary tool of control in the hands of those seeking unlimited power. Reality of the shadow force's global threat. After World War II, special attention was paid to the creation of international institutions that would guarantee the prevention of the horrors that humanity went through as a result of the formation of a totalitarian regime armed with the methodology of dehumanization and the destruction of all dissent. In fact, these are the methods of the Inquisition, and they were used earlier in the history of mankind. However, the combination of religious inquisitors with the totalitarian power of the Nazi regime produced unprecedented consequences. Now we are witnessing a repetition of this story, only with the difference that now these destructive forces are armed with modern technologies of influence and have already taken control of Russia, the state with the largest nuclear stockpile on the planet. Moreover, the rhetoric of the sanctity of this weapon and the need to use it is actively promoted by representatives of the Ratsirs in Russian society. Headlines such as scientist and political theorist Karaganov. Nuclear weapons are a gift from God, therefore not using them is a sin, are becoming not an exception but the norm. A few years ago, in one of the main temples of Russia, the state choir sang a song about a nuclear strike on the United States. In other words, the population is being purposefully prepared for the development of the scenario of the inevitable use of nuclear weapons. And this was stated back in April 2001 at a conference organized by the current head of the Ratsirs, Alexander Dvorkin, totalitarian sect's threat of the 21st century in Nizhny Novgorod. Then his closest associate, the priest of the Russian Orthodox Church, Dmitry Smirnov, stated, "We are used to the idea that Russia is vast, Russia is strong, Russia is great, and that we have plenty of nuclear buttons, that we could destroy the world if we wanted. Yes, theoretically it's possible, but we no longer have people with the courage to push those buttons. Our people have spiritually diminished. There are no longer individuals who would dare do it, dare to say, yes, we can dictate, we can call the tune. Elections in Nizhny Novgorod are coming soon. Every deputy has to understand. If his program doesn't contain the words fight against totalitarian sects, he won't be elected. We hired them, you know? They are our servants." Since then, for more than 20 years, the Ratsirs has managed to bring many of its people into power and consolidate its power in Russia, under the roof of the Devevo Brotherhood. Conclusions. Today, we stand on the brink of a global catastrophe. Ratsirs agents, under the leadership of Alexander Dvorkin, are conducting systematic subversive operations against democratic states, combining information attacks with direct violence against politicians. This campaign is already sowing chaos in democratic societies. If it achieves its goal, we will witness the collapse of democracies one after another, which will pave the way for Ratsirs' main goal, the establishment of global, totalitarian control. In order to effectively counter this growing threat to democratic institutions, it is of paramount importance to acknowledge the existence of this shadow force actively working to destroy the foundations of democracy. It is extremely important to develop and implement effective mechanisms to protect political figures, who now face constant threats of physical and informational violence. At the same time, there is an urgent need to establish robust systems to counter manipulative information campaigns designed to dehumanize politicians and incite hatred within society. The future of not only individual countries but also the entire human civilization depends on how successfully democratic societies can resist the shadow force and its attempts to destroy democracy.